Nkemo was a well-known meat seller in Euba village. He had a small shop at the village market where he sold meat every day. People from all around the village come and buy from him because his meat was always fresh and soft. It was tastier than any other meat sellers, and his price were lower too. But there was a secret that nobody knew. Nkemo lived in a small hut at the edge of the forest, far from the rest of the village. Some people thought it was strange that he lived alone, but nobody questioned him. He was a quiet man, always smiling and polite. He never caused trouble and never spoke about his personal life. The villagers thought they knew him well, but they didn't know the dark secret Nkemo was hiding. One by one, people in Euba started disappearing. It began with strangers passing through the village. A traveler would stop to rest, and then they would be gone the next day. At first, nobody thought much about it, but soon even the villagers started to disappear. A young woman named Amaka went missing after visiting the market. Her family searched for her everywhere, but she was never found. Then a man named Chike, who was known for going into the forest to gather firewood, didn't come back home. Fear started to spread through the village. Where were these people going? Some said it was spirit taking them, while others thought it was wild animals. Nobody suspected Nkemo. The villagers continued burying Nkemo's meat, enjoying it without a second thought. They never wondered why his meat was always so fresh and delicious, even when others struggled to find good meat. As more people disappeared, Nkemo's business grew. His shop was always busy with customers, and he made more money than ever before. But one day, strange rumor began to spread. A hunter named Obina, who spent most of his time in the forest, noticed something odd. He had seen Nkemo going into the forest late at night with a large sack. Obina didn't think much of it at first, but then he started to wonder, why would Nkemo be in the forest at night? What was he carrying? Obina decided to keep an eye on Nkemo. One night, Obina followed Nkemo into the forest. He stayed far behind, making sure Nkemo didn't notice him. As they walked deeper into the forest, Obina's heart pounded in his chest. It was dark, and the only sound was the crunching of the leaves beneath their feet. Suddenly, Nkemo stopped. Obina hid behind a tree and watched as Nkemo knelt down beside a large hole in the ground. The sack he had been carrying was now on the ground, and Nkemo began to open it. Obina's stomach turned as he realized what was inside. It was the body of the missing villager. Obina gasped, and Nkemo quickly looked around. He didn't see Obina, but he knew someone was watching. Without wasting any time, Nkemo quickly covered the body with the dirt and hurried back to the village. Obina couldn't believe what he had seen. Nkemo was not just a simple meat seller. He was selling human flesh. The next day, Obina went straight to the village chief. He told him everything he had seen, but the chief didn't believe in him. Nkemo was a respected man, and nobody has never suspected him of anything. The chief thought Obina was just making up stories. But Obina was determined. He gathered a group of men from the village, and they decided to confront Nkemo at his shop. When they arrived, Nkemo was busy selling meat to his customers. Obina pointed at him and shouted, "Nkemo, we know your secret." The villagers stopped what they were doing and turned back to Nkemo. His face grew pale, but he tried to stay calm. "What are you talking about?" he asked, his voice shaking slightly. Obina stepped forward. "We know what you've been doing in the forest. You've been killing people and selling their flesh to us as meat." There was a gossip from the crowd. The villagers looked at Nkemo in horror. Could it be true? Nkemo knew his time was up. Without saying a word, he turned and ran. The villagers chased after him, but Nkemu was fast. He darted through the market, knocking over stores and pushing people out of the way. Obinna and others followed him into the forest, but Nkemu disappeared in the darkness. They searched for him for hours, but he was nowhere to be found. That night, the village was filled with fear and hunger. How could they have been so blind? How could they have eaten human flesh without knowing? But Nkemu was still out there, hiding in the forest, and nobody knew if he would come back. The next morning, Moruba was a village of whispers. Every family gathered in their homes, talking in hushed tones about Nkemu. People stopped going to the market, afraid that Nkemu might return. The village chief held a meeting with the elders to discuss what should be done. "We must find him," one elder shouted. "If we don't, he will return, and more people will disappear." But others were too afraid. What if Nkemu had powers? What if he had help from evil spirits? The elders debated for hours, but no decision was made. Meanwhile, the villagers locked their doors at night and kept their children close. They didn't trust anyone anymore. The fear that Nkemu would come back kept them awake at night. A week passed and the village was still on edge. Obinna, the hunter who had exposed Nkemu's secret, had been searching the forest every day. He wanted to find Nkemu and bring him to justice. But the forest was vast, and Nkemu knew it better than anyone. One evening, Obinna did not return home. His wife Nkechi waited for him, but the night grew late. There was no sign of him. Fear gripped in her heart. She knew something was wrong. The next morning, she ran to the village square crying for hope. "Obinna is missing," she wailed. The villagers gathered around, their hearts pounding with dread. Could Nkemu have taken him? The men of the village formed a search party and went into the forest. They called out Obinna's name. There was no response. Hours passed and still there was no sign of him. The only thing they found was his hunting spear, abandoned on the ground. Nkemu had struck again. The village chief knew something had to be done. The people were terrified. They couldn't live like this any longer. He called a meeting with the strongest men in the village. "We must catch Nkemu before he kills anyone else," the chief said. "We will set a trap." The men nodded in agreement, but there was fear in their eyes. They didn't know if they were strong enough to face Nkemu, but they had no choice. The chief's plan was simple. They would lure Nkemu out of hiding by pretending to hold a feast in the village square. They knew Nkemu wouldn't resist the chance to blend in and possibly sell more of his meat. That night, the villagers lit fires and prepared food, but instead of eating, they hid in shadows, waiting for Nkemu to show himself. The night of the feast was tense. Every sound made the villagers jump. The men clenched their weapons, ready to attack at any moment. They kept their eyes on the dark corners of the village, watching for any sign of Nkemu. Hours passed, and still there was no sign of him. Some villagers started to doubt the plan. Maybe Nkemu was too smart to fall for it, and maybe he had already left the village for good. But just when they were about to give up, a shady figure appeared at the edge of the village. It was Nkemu. He was moving slowly, blending into the darkness. He looked around cautiously, making sure nobody was watching him, but the villagers were ready. As Nkemu approached the fort, the men jumped out of their hiding places, "Get him!" and the chief shouted. Nkemu tried to run, but this time there was no escape. The men surrounded him, holding him down with all their strength. Nkemu struggled, but he was outnumbered. Finally, they caught him. With Nkemu tied up, the villagers gathered around him. The chief stepped forward, his voice filled with hunger. "Tell us the truth, Nkemu. Why did you do this? Why did you kill our people and feed us their flesh?" Nkemu looked up at the chief, his eyes full of darkness. "I needed the money," he said with a cold voice. "People trusted me. They never questioned where I get the meat. It was easy." The villagers gasped in horror. How could someone they trusted do something terrible? "But why the disappearances?" one villager asked. "Why did you kill them?" Nkemu laughed bitterly. "It started with travelers, strangers nobody would miss. But then people got suspicious. I had to keep going. If I stopped, I knew I would be caught." The villagers were sickened by his words. They couldn't believe that the man they had trusted had been so heartless. Families cried out in grief for their loss of their loved ones, and the weight of Nkemu's evil filled the air. The villagers knew Nkemu had to pay for what he had done, but the question was how. The elders met once more to decide his fate. Some wanted to send him to the city for the trial, but others feared he would escape and return to hunt them. After hours of discussions, they made the final decision. Nkemu would face justice in Muuba. The next morning, the villagers gathered once again in the square. Nkemu, still tied up, was brought before them. The village chief stood tall and declared, "Nkemu has committed terrible crime against us. He has killed our people and betrayed our trust. Today we will deliver justice." The villagers cheered in agreement, but there was sadness in their hearts. No matter what happened to Nkemu, their loved ones would never return. The village square was silent as everyone was waiting for the chief's final words. Nkemu stood before the people. His face was calm, as if he didn't care about what would happen next. The villagers cared. They were filled with mixture of hunger and sorrow. Families who had lost loved ones glanced at Nkemu, their hearts heavy with grief. The chief stepped forward. "For your crimes, Nkemu, you will be banned from our village forever. You are not welcome in this village anymore. If you ever return, we will not show you mercy." The villagers gasped. Banning Nkemu seems too light a punishment for the evil he has done. But the chief had made up his mind. He believed that the forest, full of dangers, would deal with Nkemu in ways that the village could not. Nkemu was led towards the edge of the forest. As he was marched through the village, people threw stones at him and shouting curses. He kept his head down, not saying a word. The weight of his crime had fallen on him, but it was too late for any remorse. Nkemu was left at the edge of the forest, his hands still tied. The men who had brought him there stood back, their faces grim. They gave him one last look before turning around and left him to his fate. As soon as they were out of sight, Nkemu broke free of his bonds. He looked into the dark forest, a wicked smile creeping across his face. "They think they can get rid of me," he muttered to himself, but they didn't know what was waiting for them. Nkemu disappeared into the thick trees, swallowed by the shadows. The villagers, thinking they had seen the last of him, they tried to move on, but deep down, a lingering fear remained. They couldn't shake the feeling that Nkemu wasn't truly gone. Days turned into weeks, and life in Wuba slowly returned to normal. The market reopened, and the villagers began to buy their meat from other sellers. But Nkemu's disappearance didn't bring peace. The villagers were still haunted by the memories of the missing loved ones. Amaka's family still wept for her, and Chike's mother spent her days sitting by the fire, waiting for her son to return, even though she knew he would never return. The pain of their loss was deep, and the absence of the answers made it worse. The village tried to heal, but a sense of dread hung over everyone. They had gotten rid of Nkem, but something still felt wrong. One evening, a scream echoed through the village. It was a voice of Mama Nkechi, Obina's widow. The villagers rushed to her hut, fearing the worst. When they arrived, they found her standing outside, pointing towards the forest. Her face was pale, and her body shook with fear. "I saw him," she said. "Nkemu is back." The villagers looked forward to the forest, but saw nothing. Some tried to comfort her, saying she was just seeing things. But Mama Nkechi was certain of what she had seen. Nkechi had returned, and he was watching them. Fear quickly spread the village again. If Nkechi had come back, what did he want? Why hadn't he attacked yet? After Mama Nkechi's sighting of Nkemu, strange things began to happen in the village. At night, villagers would hear footsteps outside their huts, but when they looked out, no one was there. Sometimes they found deep footprints near the market, leading back towards the forest. The fear of Nkemu's return grew stronger each passing day. Some people thought he was coming back to take revenge, while others believed he was hunting them from the forest. The chief called for a meeting. "We cannot live in fear any longer," he said. "We must find if Nkemu is really back. If he is, we will deal with him once and for all." But the villagers were too afraid. They had banished Nkemu to the forest, and nobody wanted to face him again. Obina's friends, the hunters of the village, decided to take matters into their own hands. They gathered in secret and made a plan to go into the forest and find Nkemu. They were tired of living in fear, and they believed that facing Nkemu head-on was the only way to end the nightmare. Armed with bows and arrows, they set out before dawn. The forest was thick and dark, its trees towering above them like silent giants. The hunters moved carefully, their eyes scanning every shadow. Hours passed, but there was no sign of Nkemu. They began to wonder if Mama Nkechi had been wrong. Maybe Nkemu was truly gone. But as they were about to turn back, one of the hunters spotted something on the ground. It was a footprint, fresh and unmistakable. Nkemu was nearby. Following the trail of footprints, the hunters moved deeper into the forest. They were close, and their hearts pounded in their chests. The hair was thick with tension, and every crack of the wing made them jump. Finally, they came upon a small clearing. In its center was a makeshift shelter made of branches and leaves. Smoke rose from a small fire. Sitting next to it was Nkemu. He looked up as the hunters approached, a smirk on his face. "So, you've come to finish what you started," he said calmly. "But you don't understand. You can't get rid of me." The hunters raised their weapons, ready to strike, but Nkemu didn't move. He stared at them, his eyes dark and hollow. "You've been living in fear because of me," he continued. "But I'm not the one you should be afraid of. The forest has its own secrets, and I've become one of them." The hunters hesitated. Nkemu's words sent chill down their spines. Was he telling the truth? Was there something more to fear in the forest than just him? Before the hunters could act, a cold wind blew through the clearing, and the fire suddenly went out. The fire around them grew heavy, and a voice, deep and ancient, echoed through the trees. "Nkemu is ours now," the voice said. "He belongs to the forest. Leave him, or you will face the same fate." The hunters froze in terror. They had heard stories of the spirit that lived in the forest, but they never believed them. Now standing before Nkemu, they knew the stories were true. One by one, the hunters lowered their weapons, and they turned and fled, leaving Nkemu behind. As they ran through the forest, the voice echoed in their ears, a chilling reminder that the forest had claimed Nkemu, and it would not let him go. The hunters returned to the village in the dead of the night, their faces pale and their hands trembling. The villagers gathered around, eager to hear what happened in the forest. But the hunters said nothing, their eyes haunted by the fear, and it was clear that something terrible had occurred. The chief pressed them for answers. What did you find? Did you see Nkem? He asked. One of the hunters finally spoke, his voice shaky. Nkem is not alone in the forest. The spirits have claimed him. We cannot fight him anymore. The villagers gossiped in disbelief. Spirits? No one had taken the old stories of the forest spirits seriously. But now, the hunters' bravest men in the village were shaken to their core. The chief's face grew darker with worry. We will not live in fear, the chief declared. If Nkem is truly with the spirits, then we must find a way to protect ourselves. But the fear had already taken root in the village. People began locking their doors at night, refusing to speak about Nkem. The forest became a place of terror, and no one dared to go near it. One night, Mama Nkechi had a dream. In it, she saw Nkem standing at the edge of the village, staring at her. His eyes were dark and empty, and behind him, the tree seemed to move as if it was alive. Nkem wouldn't speak, but Mama Nkechi felt a chill run down her spine. In the dream, she heard a voice of her late husband, Obina. The spirits won't stop, he whispered. You must find a way to break their hold on Nkem. When she woke up, Mama Nkema was drenched in sweat. She knew the dream wasn't just a dream. It was a warning. The spirit had grip on Nkem, but there was a way to free him and bring peace back to the village. She decided to seek out the village elder, Papa Eze, a wise man known for his deep knowledge of the old ways. If anyone knew how to deal with the spirits of the forest, it would be him. Mama Nkechi visited Papa Eze early in the next morning, explaining her dream and the fear that had taken over the village. The elder listened carefully, his wrinkled face thoughtful. The spirits of the forest are ancient and powerful, Papa Eze said. They do not care for human life, only for balance in their world. If Nkemo had hungered them, they will use him as a tool of chaos. Mama Nkechi's heart sank. Is there nothing we can do? Papa Eze thought for a moment before answering. There is a way. The spirits demand respect, and they will only release hold on Nkemo if we make an offering to please them. But what kind of offering? Mama Nkechi asked, desperation in her voice. A life for a life, Papa Eze said solemnly. The spirit will accept nothing less. Mama Nkechi's eyes widened in horror. A life for a life? Who would make such a sacrifice? The elder's words filled her with dread, but she knew it might be the only way to save the village from Nkem and the spirit that controlled him. Mama Nkechi shared Papa Eze's words with the chief and the villagers. The news spread like wildfire, and soon everyone was talking about the sacrifice that would be required to free the village from the spirits. But the thought of giving up a life to save the village was too much to bear. Who would volunteer to make such a sacrifice? No one wanted to give up their own life, and no one wanted to choose someone else to be sacrificed. The village was torn. Fear gripped everyone, but so did the guilt of asking someone to die for them. As days passed, the tension grew. Some people even suggested that the village could continue living in fear rather than spill innocent blood. Mama Nkechi, however, couldn't shake the feeling that the village would never be safe until Nkem and the spirit were dealt with. One evening, as the village gathered to discuss their fate, a figure stepped forward from the crowd. It was Chike's mother. Her eyes were filled with sadness but also determination. I'll go, she said, her voice strong despite the tremble in her hands. I have lost my son. There is nothing left for me here. If my sacrifice can save the village, then I'll do it. The villagers were stunned. Chike's mother had suffered greatly from the loss of her son, and now she was willing to give her own life to save them all. The chief stepped forward, placing a hand on her shoulder. We cannot ask this for you, he said softly. Your sacrifice is too great. But Mama Chike shook her head. The spirit took my son. If this is the only way to stop them from taking more lives, then I'll do it. My life is already empty without him. Tears fell from the eyes of many in the crowd. The weight of her decision was heavy, but no one could argue against her courage. With heavy hearts, the villagers prepared for ritual. Papa Eze led the preparations, gathering the items needed to make the offering to the spirits. The village was silent as they walked, the air thick with sorrow and fear. One night, on the full moon, the villagers gathered at the edge of the forest. Chike's mother stood at the center, her head held high despite the fear in her eyes. Papa Eze began the ritual, calling upon the spirit of the forest. The wind picked up and the trees swayed as if they are listening to his words. As the ritual processed, the air grew colder and the ground seemed to tremble beneath their feet. The villagers watched silently as their hearts pounded with fear and hope. Chike's mother stepped forward, offering herself to the spirit. The wind howled and the low voice echoed through the trees. The offering is accepted. Suddenly, a figure appeared at the edge of the clearing. It was Nkem. His face was pale and his eyes wide with shock. He looked around, confused, as if he didn't understand where he was. The spirit had released him. Chike's mother collapsed to the ground, her life fading away. The villagers rushed to her side, tears streaming down their faces. She had given everything to save them, and now she was gone. Nkemo fell on his knees, weeping, and the spirit no longer controlled him, but the weight of his action rushed him. He had betrayed his village, his people, and he was now left with nothing but guilt. After the spirit released their hold on Nkem, he was a broken man. The villagers watched him with a mixture of pity and hunger. He had caused so much pain, but now he was suffering in a way no one could imagine. Nkemo wandered the village, lost in his own mind. He didn't speak to anyone, and no one spoke to him. He became a shadow, a reminder of the evil that had once gripped their village. But the villagers couldn't forgive him, even though the spirits were gone. Nkeme's crimes were still fresh in their hearts. The family of those who had harmed couldn't look at him without feeling a sting of loss. The village tried to move on, but the scars of Nkeme's action ran deep. Weeks passed, and slowly, life in Uba began to return to normal. The villagers rebuilt their lives, though the memories of the past still lingered. Nkemo, however, could not move on. He spent his days in isolation, haunted by the faces of those he had hurt. No matter how much time passed, the guilt weighed on him like a heavy stone. One day, Nkemo made a decision. He would leave Euba for good. He couldn't live among the people he had betrayed. With nothing but clothes on his back, he walked out of the village and to the unknown. The village watched him go, but no one stopped him. His departure felt like a final chapter in a long, painful story. With Nkemo gone, the village finally found peace. The forest no longer held the same fear it once did, and the villagers began to heal. Chike's mother was remembered as a hero, her sacrifice forever honored by the people of Huuba. The chief ensured that her name would never be forgotten, and every year the village held a ceremony in her memory. The story of Nkemo and the spirit became cautionally a tale, a reminder of the dangers of the upgrade and the power of the forest. Though the village had suffered, they had come through stronger and more united. And so, Wuba lived in peace and its people forever grateful for the sacrifice that had been made for them. Thank you so much for watching. Thank you so much for reaching this far. This is the end of our amazing story. Kindly, if you've not yet subscribed to this channel, kindly subscribe, share and like this video, and don't forget the notification bell. In that you'll be notified whenever I post a video, and leave something in the comment section. Just let me know what you think of this video. What have you learned in this story? See you in my next video. I love you all.